Star Wars boss departs after leading franchise reboot. Now, in theory, when you read that, you'd think that this is something brilliant and that Star Wars is automatically going to be great again. I'm going to be getting into shortly why I honestly don't think it is. Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy is stepping down after 14 years at the helm of the studio that makes Star Wars one of the highest grossing Hollywood franchises in history. Kennedy, who was picked by Star Wars creator George Lucas to lead the company, will become a full-time producer, the studio said on Thursday. Now, let's go all the way back to the beginning here. Regarding that at the time, in 2012 when this happened, in theory this would have seemed like a good idea. Kathleen Kennedy did produce some of the biggest films of the 80s and 90s. She did produce films such as E.T., Hook, Jurassic Park, the Jurassic Park original trilogy, a number of other films. She was also executive producer on films like the Back to the Future films, Goonies. She was also part of many other big films of the 80s and 90s. So in theory, at that time, you can understand why that would seem like a good idea. The problem is we had no idea what we were going to be getting under Kennedy and Disney. Best known for steering the reboot of the science fiction series, Kennedy oversaw hits like The Force Awakens, but she was also behind the franchise's first ever box office flop. I guess it's kind of the same thing really. Solo: A Star Wars Story. Solo was one of those films I think everyone collectively agrees it was a film that was unnecessary, nobody really asked for it, and overall that's why the film failed the way it did. Dave Filoni, who has worked on many of the studio's animated shows, will take the role of President and Chief Creative Officer, working alongside co-president Lin-Wen Brennan. Now, I don't know an awful lot about these two, but ultimately I know that a lot of the people that I watch, at least on YouTube, aren't the biggest fans of them. Filoni credited Kennedy for overseeing the greatest expansion in Star Wars storytelling. See what I mean? Like I said earlier. Kennedy had led Lucasfilm since 2012 when entertainment giant Disney bought the studio, home to the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises. She oversaw the relaunch of the Star Wars franchise with 5 feature films which together earned more than $5 billion worldwide. They include the sequel trilogy starring Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver, which broke box office records in the US. Despite the amount of money that these feature films made, I think it was more down to the fact that it was Star Wars, the Star Wars brand, that made the money rather than the quality of the films. But anyway, during Kennedy's time in charge of Lucasfilm, it produced shows like The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and the critically acclaimed Andor series from the Disney Plus streaming platform. Now, I've not watched any of these all the way through. I know The Mandalorian was pretty good in the first and I think second season as well. And also Andor, I think that one's got quite a bit of praise also. However, I will admit that I probably watched more YouTubers tearing them apart than actually watching them myself. Because, let's be honest, regarding a lot of the Star Wars content, I'd regard it was more funny and more entertaining watching people tear it apart on YouTube. Kennedy also introduced more female leads and characters from diverse backgrounds, but that approach was criticised by some fans for what they saw as a social agenda being brought into the Star Wars franchise. That is one of the biggest complaints that I think a lot of Star Wars fans had with the Disney era of Star Wars. The fact that many people, including myself, believe that they sacrificed good writing in order to push a certain political agenda. When you intend to make a film, but make it more about a political message, naturally a lot of people are not going to like said film. And it's ultimately going to end up just dividing the fans, and that's exactly what happened with these films, a lot of these films that we got from Disney. There was also backlash over Lucasfilm's decision to create new shows that did not follow decades of Star Wars history from sources like novels and comics. Again, that's another major criticism that these films from Disney had gotten. The fact that they did ignore established canon, established lore, in order to tell their own stories, and many people, as I mentioned, considered them rather underwhelming. Kennedy will continue at the studio to produce its upcoming blockbuster films, The Mandalorian and Grogu, and Star Wars Starfighter, which will star Ryan Gosling. Like I mentioned, she's not completely gone. She's still going to be here. She's still going to have some creative control, at least over these films that are mentioned right here. It has been a true privilege to spend more than a decade working alongside the extraordinary talent at Lucasfilm, Kennedy said on Thursday. She went on to say, "I'm excited to continue developing films and television with both long-time collaborators and fresh voices who represent the future of storytelling." So, like I mentioned, she isn't completely gone. Yes, she may have stepped down as the president, the main leader at Lucasfilm, but she is still going to be around producing films. Now, I can't really tell you what project she's going to be working on outside of those two ones I mentioned earlier, that Mandalorian and Starfighter film. Whether she'll be still working, producing Star Wars films, series, or whether she'll be working on another brand, another license owned by Lucasfilm, I wouldn't be able to tell you at this point. I think a lot of people have this same viewpoint, though, regarding the way that Kathleen Kennedy has stepped down after 14 years of being in... Apologies, that is my phone. After stepping down as president of Lucasfilm. It looks like a very jumped ship kind of situation here. Many people would argue that she has led these big franchises. These were some of the biggest franchises in the world, if not the biggest franchises in the world at one point. She has ran them into the ground. I think it was a combination of many things, but Kathleen Kennedy still had a lot of creative control over these projects that were put into place while she was in charge. Because when you're both producing and you're also the big boss lady at the company, you're going to have a lot of creative control. Pretty much everyone knew that. It was very clear to see that she was wanting her own political views, her own political agendas put into these films. The hatred and division that the sequel trilogy actually garnered, I'd argue, was even worse than the prequel trilogy from the early 2000s. And the way in which she has stepped down as the leader, as the big boss at Lucasfilm, as I mentioned, it looks like she's jumped ship. She has done so much damage to established franchises that were at one point some of the biggest in the world. And whether Lucasfilm can recover from this damage under the new management it's got, I honestly don't think so, but it is a wait and see kind of thing. But ultimately, gentlemen, this has been Lord Flashart. Make sure to rate, comment, favourite, share and subscribe, and I will see you again. Cheerio!